Okay, that was a lot of practice, guys.
It's my judge, right?
Yes.
It's not, is it? My opponent right now. Then, I shall begin. Military dictatorship is born from the power of the gun, and so it undermines the concept of the rule of law and gives birth to a culture of might, a culture of weapons, violence, and intolerance. That was Benazir Bhutto. It is because I agree with Benazir Bhutto that I feel compelled to affirm the resolution today. Resolved, the United States ought not provide military aid to authoritarian regimes. I reserve the right to define any terms within the round. The highest value found within today's round is sanctity of life. Sanctity of life is defined by CDE's Dictionary of Lincoln-Douglas debate as, quote, the belief that human life is sacred in and of itself. Under no condition should a life be taken, close quote. Sanctity of life is most important in today's round because if the value of life is not upheld, there is nothing stopping the loss of human life for personal or political gain. The best criterion to evaluate this resolution is categorical imperative. It is defined by CDE's Dictionary of Lincoln-Douglas debate as, quote, a principle advanced by Immanuel Kant which contends that there are some universal laws that exist for all beings. Moral actions, then, are only those acts by an individual which they would want to become a universal law, close quote. So for the action of the United States giving military aid to authoritarian regimes to be moral, it must become a universal law that the United States gives aid to any authoritarian regime. Categorical imperative best achieves my value because if we were to provide military aid to authoritarian regimes, then this power would most definitely be usurped to harm other people, which is a direct violation of my value of sanctity of life. Resolution analysis. The resolution does not ever state when the United States provides military aid or to what authoritarian regimes the United States ought to provide support to. Therefore, we can assume that under this resolution, military aid would be provided to any authoritarian regime. My opponent would not be able to argue that we can provide military aid to specific countries because the resolution does not provide these restrictions. In affirming today's resolution, I would often follow contentions. Contention 1. Military aid causes domestic problems. Subpoint A, human rights abuses. Unstable developing countries have shown to recruit child soldiers during wartime. A report written by Elizabeth Powers entitled Greed, Guns, and Grist, U.S. Military Assistance and Arms Transfer to Developing Countries states that, quote, during the Liberian Civil War, the Liberian government was estimated to have recruited 21,000 child soldiers. The Lord's Resistance Army, also known as LRA, based in northern Uganda, has also been cited for using child soldiers, close quote. The report goes on to state, quote, in light of the basic human rights tenets concerning the prohibition of the use of child soldiers, which the United States promulgated and continues to support, aiding regimes that use child soldiers violates the United States principles, close quote. Child World Index of 2016 provides all the countries in the world which are known to have used child soldiers. The ones that the United States gives support to is Chad, Colombia, Cote d'Ivoire, DRC, India, Libya, Peru, Sri Lanka, Sudan, Israel, Indonesia, Nepal, Bhutan, Burundi, Yemen, Afghanistan, Lebanon, and Liberia. This report was made by U.S. Aid Finding Fund between 1946 and 2016. The specific evidence used was from 2016. Subpoint B, United States military aid has led to mass starvation in Yemen. Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times reported that, quote, some 85,000 children may have already died here in Yemen, and 12 million more people may be on the brink of starvation. Casualties in part of the 3-year-old American-backed Saudi war in Yemen, close quote. Mark Lowcock, the United Nations humanitarian chief, stated, quote, in the worst case, what we have in Yemen now has the potential to be worse than anything any professional in this field has seen during their working lives, close quote. The United States provides military aid to Saudi Arabia, an authoritarian regime. The war between Yemen and Saudi Arabia has led to poverty and famine for Yemenis human beings. There are deaths of not only soldiers fighting, but also women and children because they're not able to eat. We need to stop military aid to any authoritarian regime, because if we don't, more soldiers, women, and children are going to die. We have seen this with Yemen. People are dying, which is a violation of my value of the sanctity of life. Contention 2. United States support an authoritarian regime does not help to de-escalate situations. In the 3 years between July 2014 and November 2017, Conflict Armament Research, also known as CARB, deployed its field investigation teams across Islamic State, also known as IS, force frontlines positions. These operations covered an unbroken arc of territory extending from northern Syrian cities Kobane to the south of the Iraqi capital Baghdad. While this report does not provide an exhaustive overview of all IS weapons and their origins, it is unquestionably the most comprehensive, verified study of the group's weapons to date. The report states, in May 2015, Syrian YPG forces recovered a PG-17 40mm rocket from IS forces near Al-Hasaka, Syria. Wakar documented it on 20th of May 2015. The government of Bulgaria confirmed that export of the item to the United States Department of the Army through the United States company Chrysler Police Supply. The application for the export license was accompanied by an original EUC issued by the United States Department of the Army with a non-re-export clause. Close quote. This evidence shows that military support and weapons provided by the United States to Syria, an authoritarian regime, has landed in the hands of terrorists, which has led to the prolonging of this violence. We have literally been providing our enemies with weapons. The United States providing military aid has increased the problem, not helped to solve it. The United States, this has led to the shedding of human life, which violates the sanctity of life value. Because this is a problem, we must cut off military aid to this authoritarian regime. Because of categorical imperative, we must cut off aid to any authoritarian regime. Contention 3, United States support negatively affects the United States. In May 2017, the United States government signed an agreement to provide Saudi Arabia with $110 billion for their own military. On June 12, 2018, the National Public Radio reported the Saudi Arabia-led airstrike that had bombed a cholera treatment center in Yemen. Doctors Without Borders organization stated that the building was clearly marked as a healthcare building. Despite this, it was still attacked and destroyed by a Saudi Arabia airstrike. The United States is providing Saudi Arabia with the ability to harm our own people. Not only that, but the United States spent roughly $49 billion in foreign military aid as of 2016, according to the Council of Foreign Relations. This $49 billion could be spent on humanitarian aid, the Red Cross organization, etc., providing help to people in need. We need to provide help and uphold life, not allow dictators to continue shedding human life in the name of safety. It is as George Orwell said, power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes a revolution in order to establish dictatorship. For these reasons, I feel compelled to affirm today's resolution. The United States ought not provide military aid to authoritarian regimes. Thank you. I now open myself to cross-examination.
Awesome. Is my opponent ready?
I am.
Is my audience ready? Is most importantly, is my judge ready? And awesome. With that, I will begin. So moving on to your value was sanctity of life, correct?
That is correct.
In your own words, can you define sanctity of life?
Sanctity of life is basically just that life, human life, is sacred in and of itself, and that under no circumstance should a life be taken maliciously.
Okay. Okay. So your criterion was categorical imperative. Could you define that in your own words?
My own words, categorical imperative. Well, this is actually about a criteria developed by Immanuel Kant. Basically, it's that in order for an action to become moral, we must state that it would be applied to anything that falls under the category of who or what we're applying the action to. So, in this instance, with authoritarian regimes, in order for providing military aid to an authoritarian regime to be moral under categorical imperative, we must provide that military aid to any authoritarian regime in order for it to be moral. And I'm tying it in because we would see that if we were to provide military aid to any authoritarian regime, this could include illegitimate governments such as ISIS, Al-Qaeda. This would include North Korea. If we were to provide military support to those organizations, it would most definitely be usurped and therefore lead to the shedding of human life.
Okay, so categorical imperative. So essentially you have to achieve categorical imperative before you can achieve sanctity of life, correct?
Categorical imperative is a way that we can keep the shedding of human life from happening.
Okay, and uphold sanctity of life. That's what you're saying, correct?
I am.
Okay, so do all countries that are involved in the case of today's resolution, like, uphold categorical imperative?
What do you mean by that?
Like, do these authoritarian regimes, or let's say even the United States, they go by a categorical imperative way of thinking?
What I'm meaning by categorical imperative is that it's in the action of giving military aid. It's not something that a country can really use as a rule. It's just.
That's fine.
Sorry, do you mind if I just keep explaining that because I don't.
It's fine. I understand now. Okay, so on your contention one, military aid, could you just give me the tagline of that contention?
Yes. Military aid causes domestic problems.
Okay, so in there you mentioned the Liberian Civil War. What year did that happen? I can just take evidence afterwards.
Okay.
So on to actually your second B for this one. You mentioned mass starvation because of a three-year-old backed U.S. war between Saudi Arabia. Could you explain that for me?
Yeah.
You can briefly, please.
Yeah, no, for sure. So the United States backs Saudi Arabia with military support, and their ongoing war with Yemen has not only led to the shedding of soldiers on both sides, it's also led to Yemen becoming more financially unstable, leading to starvation of their women, of their children.
Okay.
Basically, as it stood, 85,000 children have died in Yemen,
Okay, that works.
and 12 million more are on the brink of starvation.
Okay, thank you. Could I take 2 minutes of prep time, please?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. You have like an exact place in here where I can find that.
Yeah, for sure.
We're having- oh. That's not what I was looking for. I was looking for the point about the 3-year-old backboard. That's, oh, see, that's not.
Oh, I thought you talked about
No, I was talking about
the day of the library when the library war was.
Yeah, that's what it is. That 1999.
What the library war was different from the 3-year back war with Saturday.
Okay, what was the librarian one? What was the year on that again?
1999.
1999. Okay, thank you.
I paused your track during that one.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Your turn.
That's 2 minutes. Could you give me 30 more seconds? Thank you.
Your fan is almost the same as the one on the wall.
Then would you like a brief off time about maps?
I'm sure.
Okay, cool. This was a brief off-time roadmap. I will be going, providing my negative case, and then I will be making corrections to my opponent's case. So with that, is my opponent ready? Is my audience ready? And most importantly, is my ready? Awesome. And with that, I will begin. It is because countries that are already unstable cannot stably support themselves without military aid that are obliged to stand in firm negation of. Resolve. The United States ought not provide military aid to authoritarian regimes. I offer the following definitions for today's round. Military aid. Global Issues 2010 defines military aid as the aid may be in the form of training or even giving credits for foreign militaries to purchase weapons and equipment from the donor country. Authoritarian regimes. Jennings 2006 defines authoritarian regimes as theories of democratic politics see elections as the means by which citizens hold politicians accountable for the quality of governance. Civilians may have insufficient information to monitor politicians closely, and in any event must choose on infrequent occasions among packages of policy promises, parties that may not reflect their own views or interests very well. But they can, at a minimum cost, oust incompetent, unsuccessful, or simply unpopular leaders in routine, low-cost ways. Citizens in authoritarian regimes only rarely have this option. Authoritarian elections do not choose government leaders or the set of policies that the government will follow. Generally speaking, citizens cannot throw the thumbs out. Changes in leadership and policy changes are decided upon by elite actors such as military officers and high-level party officials, not citizens, and the power is vested in the central ear of the country. The highest value for representing today's ground is government legitimacy. Merriam-Webster defines a legitimate government as a government generally acknowledged as being in control of a nation and deserving formal recognition, which is symbolized by the exchange of diplomats between that government and the government of other countries. With this, we can interpret that government legitimacy as when a government is in control of its nation and deserves formal recognition, and this can be symbolized through an exchange of diplomats between the government and the governments of other countries. The best criterion for basing today's round upon is utilitarianism. Oxford 2017 defines utilitarianism as the doctrine that an action is right insofar as it promotes happiness, and that the greatest happiness of the greatest number should be the guiding principle of conduct. Utilitarianism must be achieved before we can achieve our value of government legitimacy. Contention 1. U.S. military aid stabilizes the region. Subpoint A. U.S. military aid increases rates of democratization. Savage 2017 defines states the United States Agency for International Development devotes substantial amounts of aid to promote rule of law, develop civil society, improve elections, and foster democratization and better governance, hoping to increase democracy in the recipient states. These efforts have often been considered successful. Cross-national studies have found that such aid is associated with an increased level of democracy. Finkel, Perez, Lennon, and Seligson 2007, and Scott and Still 2011. Democratization is good. Len Jones states in 1998, the recent critics of U.S. efforts to promote democracy have not been presented a convincing case that spreading democracy is a bad idea. The international spread of democracy will offer many benefits to new democracies and to the United States. The democratic peace proposition appears robust. Even though scholars need to continue to develop multiple explanations for why democracies rarely, if ever, go to war, the evidence on whether democratization increases the risk of war is mixed at best, and policies can be crafted to minimize any risks of conflict in these cases. The problem of illiberal democracy has been exaggerated. Democratic elections usually do more good than harm. The United States should, however, aim to promote liberal values as well as electoral democracy. And the soft authoritarian challenge to the liberal democracy was not persuasive, even before the Asian economic turmoil of 1997 and 1998 undermined claims for the security of Asian values. Subpoint B, military aid deters outside threats. Johnson 2015 states, we also find that alliances that require states to engage in more extensive peacetime military coordination are more successful at general deterrence. Peacetime military coordination can increase the capacity of an alliance by helping the allies fight together more effectively. It can also increase the credibility of an alliance by increasing the costs associated with the alliance. Thus, state leaders can affect the deterrent potential of their cooperative security arrangements through their design choices. Subpoint C, military aid lowers civilian casualties during conflict. Omil-Chiva 2017 states, however, there are some positive and encouraging results. Broadly, as indicated in the findings section, the programs which are grant-based and include elements of military training and exchange are negatively associated with civilian deaths in situations of political conflict. The magnitude of these programs, that is, the total number of foreign officers brought for training in the United States military establishments or trained overseas for the dollar value of military equipment supplied to foreign governments, in this case, it varies considerably from year to year and in contingent on annual budget appropriations in the United States. In other words, while some financial support from the states that are recipients of grant-based foreign military programs is expected, the programs are largely funded by the United States government. Contention 2. U.S. selectivity increases domestic safety in the recipient country. Subpoint A. The United States primarily gives aid to countries with good human rights track records, lowering human rights abuses. Poor 1911 states that with the exception of one much criticized study, quantitative studies have not yielded much support for the hypothesis that human rights variables are considered by U.S. foreign policy decision makers. This study, however, employs an improved human rights variable, and as a result, demonstrates that human rights records have been important in determining which countries are allocated aid. And it is with this that I can only see a negative out. Now I will move on to my opponent's case. So my opponent's value of sanctity of life through their criterion of categorical imperative. Simply how when I asked him across X to explain that how his criterion I told him that, asked him if he can tell me how it would apply to, if it would apply to other countries. And he basically just rambled on about how it would connect to sanctity of life and how through categorical imperative, we can uphold life. However, through categorical imperative, he did not directly tell me if it is followed by the United States. So we cannot uphold this because simply we have to weigh the United States as well as the authoritarian regimes here. And we all know here in this round that categorical imperative is not going to be followed in the authoritarian regime. So we automatically have to assume that it's going to be followed in the United States. And because he did not tell me if it was provided in the United States, we cannot uphold this. And so in this case, it would automatically drop his value of sanctity of life as well as his criterion of categorical imperative. And just one more attack on his value of sanctity of life. Through this value of sanctity of life, once again, the categorical imperative, we cannot every time achieve sanctity of life, because before we achieve sanctity of life and categorical imperative, we have to achieve human rights through categorical imperative before we can achieve the sanctity of life. And so through this case, we cannot weigh this strongly enough because he cannot back up categorical imperative simply and uphold sanctity of life. On this contention one, you brought up the Liberian Civil War. This was in 1999. Since 1999, there's been many policy changes, including amendments to the Federal Military Aid Assistance Program and the Act. And because of this, we cannot uphold this, because simply stating that this would be held is not strong enough. And it is with that that I can only once again urge the committee to ballot. Thank you. And I'll forward open myself up to class 6.
My opponent ready?
I am.
Is my judge ready? My audience ready? Then I shall begin. So in your definition of governmental legitimacy, you said that it's kind of like a government that deserves formal recognition. That was some of the words you used.
That is one of the values or things I could define.
So what do you define as a country that deserves formal recognition?
It would be a country that upholds democratic ideals that I explained in my conventions.
So only countries that uphold democratic ideals are legitimate governments?
No, but a country that upholds the essentially the idea of democracy, or has at least some funding principles or some guiding principles from it, could be defined as a legitimate government.
So if there's a government that doesn't have any principles of democracy, they're an illegitimate government?
If they're not following at least some part of democracy or another form that's not an authoritarian regime, then yes, they're not going to be.
So authoritarian regimes are not legitimate governments?
No, they're not.
Okay. So you believe that we should provide military aid to legitimate governments?
I believe that we should provide it to an authoritarian regime.
So you believe that we should provide it to illegitimate governments?
I'm saying as if we
Because you just said that authoritarian regimes are not legitimate governments.
No, so let me explain to you. So what I said is that by providing this military aid to these authoritarian regimes, we're going to be being legitimate, because as I explained, we can democratize this authoritarian regime, and therefore they can become legitimate through our acts.
But that's in the future. Right now, are they legitimate governments?
Currently, an authoritarian regime would not be a legitimate government on their own.
And currently, right now, are we providing military aid to them?
But through the resolution, we're just
I-
trying to establish if like we shouldn't provide it, but clearly we should. And so I don't see what you're getting at here.
I'm trying to ask you, right now, are we giving military aid to authoritarian regimes?
I said yes.
So we're giving military aid to legitimate governments right now.
Yes, but like I said, through our military aid programs, they're going to become legitimate, and so that's what matters.
Will the fact that they might or might not become legitimate take back the fact that there are lives lost that aren't even part of the conflict?
Well, as clearly shown in my case, we are saving lives with this military aid, so I don't see how you can.
But will
make
it
that false
take back the lives that are already taken?
No, it will not, but it's going to still push for better life, and we can actually.
Will it take back the fact that they're inducting children into their military?
It will, because it will basically sum up what's been going on in these countries, these terrible countries, and we can achieve good.
So you said that lower civilian casualties. Do you have any specific exact numbers on civilian casualties before and after United States involvement?
Where was that at?
Your contention 1 subpoint C.
Military aid lowers civilian casualties during conflict. In there, I did state that I stated that the programs which are grant based and include elements of military training and exchange are negatively associated with civilian deaths in situations of political conflict. And I provided that that's the only case where this would happen. However, the number is not available, as this was from essentially an authoritarian regime that came out of it. And the exact numbers of death
some prep time? That is all the prep time I'll be taking right now. How much time do I have for this?
4 minutes.
4 minutes. All right. It's my judgment. It's my understanding. It's my opponent.
I am.
As a brief off-time roadmap, I will start by attacking my opponent's case, to which I will go to 10 minutes. With that, I shall begin. With attacking my opponent's value of governmental legitimacy, my opponent agreed during cross-examination that right now, authoritarian regimes are not legitimate governments, and that right now we are providing them with military aid. And so my opponent just agreed that we are right now providing military aid to illegitimate governments. And he states that through military aid, we can provide them, make them legitimate. But as I stated, we've been providing military to Saudi Arabia for 3 years now, in the 3-year back to war with Yemen, and still they're an authoritarian regime. And might I just ask you all, how can an authoritarian regime become democratic if we're still enabling them with ways to assert their dominance or with that military support? Moving on to my opponent's criterion of utilitarianism. My opponent states that utilitarianism creates the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Well, through that, the death of those 85,000 children in Yemen is justified. The bombing of a cholera treatment center in Yemen is justified. Providing weapons to terrorists is justified. Child soldiers is justified because it's creating the greatest number of good for the greatest number of people. And now, logically, this doesn't really make any sense. Moving on to my opponent's first contention. My opponent stated that military aid increases rates of democratization. But then I go back to my attack on his value of governmental legitimacy. How we've provided military aid to Saudi Arabia for 3 years now, and they're still no longer, as my opponent states, a legitimate government because they're still an authoritarian regime. Furthermore, as I state again, how can an authoritarian regime become legitimate if we're still providing them with the means and the weapons and soldiers training? Moving on to my opponent's contention 1, subpoint C, on how United States military aid lowers civilian casualties. I would like to bring up a piece of evidence by the Washington Post, basically stating that 2017 was the deadliest year for civilian casualties in Iraq and Syria, with as many as 6,000 people killed in strikes conducted by U.S.-led coalition according to the watchdog group Airways. Furthermore, Radio Free Europe states that about 39,000 people have been killed in Syria in 2017. This is shocking. Combine this with the Clear Treatment Center being bombed. Combine this with the 85,000 starved deaths of women and children. My opponent's statement that it lowers civilian casualties is just not, it does not make sense. Moving on to attack on his contention on human rights abuses. My opponent states that it lowers human rights abuses, yet as we still find the United States has supported authoritarian regimes that have been known to induct children into the military, that have provided weapons to terrorists, as I provided in my second contention, has led to the starvation of people, and has bombed our own Cholera Treatment Center in Yemen. So how does this lead to lowering human rights abuses? I ask the judge, I ask the audience, I ask my opponent this. Moving on to defend my own case on sanctity of life. My opponent states that I did not really justify my criterion of categorical imperative, that I quote unquote just rambled on about it. However, as I stated, this whole debate is if basically in order for providing military to be moral, we must say that we provide it to any authoritarian regime. That's what I'm saying. And because I'm saying that if we were to provide it to any authoritarian regime, it would be a cert to harm other people, as we've seen with Saudi Arabia, as we would see if we were to provide military aid to North Korea, to Russia. It would be a cert to harm other people. And that's how categorical imperative fits into my case. Defending my first contention, my opponent stated my child soldiers from 1999. However, I have a source of evidence the Child Soldiers Index is from 2008. With that, I see nothing but infringement about. Thank you.
Can I speak to the remainder of my question? Okay, thank you. Screen keeps like hanging out, so I don't see it. Okay, so as a brief option of that, I will be going over my case, building it, and then I will address the final two contentions I did not touch in my initial after my negative case, and then I will go against I will rebuttal the attacks my opponent makes against my case, and then finally I will provide some voters for the judge. So with that, is my opponent ready?
I am.
And is my audience ready? And most importantly, is my judge ready? Awesome. Then with that, I will begin. So my criterion for today's round was was that of government legitimacy. And now government legitimacy is defined as, essentially, it is defined as the value, the value for today's round is government legitimacy. And once again, government legitimacy is defined as a government generally acknowledges being in control of the nation and deserving formal recognition, which is symbolized by the exchange of diplomats between that government and the governments of other countries. And as I stated in cross-examination, government legitimacy in this case doesn't just, like when a country deserves this formal recognition, this means that they are deemed legitimate as government, so the entire definition contradicts itself in a positive way. Onto my value or my criterion of utilitarianism. Once again, Oxford 2017 defines utilitarianism as a doctrine that an action is right insofar as it promotes happiness and that the greatest happiness of the greatest number should be the guiding principle of conduct. My contention one was U.S. military aid stabilizes the region, and I talked about how through military aid we can accomplish democratization, and through democracy it is stable, and so we will be benefiting the people, and that we will be favoring the greater number, as we will be favoring the civilians of the United States, the civilians of the authoritarian regime, and any national conflicts that this authoritarian regime has. Furthermore, essentially my sub-point B and C were the same there, just different pieces of evidence, and once again, elaborating further on the point. Contention 2 was U.S. selectivity increases domestic safety in the recipient country. So I talked about how we only provide through the U.S. primarily gives aid. So they favor the countries with good human rights track records. And so essentially by doing this, we don't have to just say that like when my opponent addressed that we are giving aid to these countries who are committing these crimes. Through what I said is that we're favoring the ones who are we're giving aid to the countries with good human rights track records. And that's what we're favoring. Like, yes, these lower countries that do not have the best records, we don't want to provide them as much aid, but we're still, through this, we can still stabilize them through democratization and whatnot. Essentially, that was what my contention 2 was. So now I'll move on to the final attacks I was going to make. So he stated his contention 2 with military aid doesn't de-escalate situations. However, I showed that it does de-escalate situations because we can use democratization as stated in my case, and we can uphold my criterion and my value, and we can accomplish this through this. And through my opponent's criterion and value, we cannot accomplish this, as clearly shown. In my rebuttal I made against them, I said that there is a middleman between his criterion of categorical imperative and his value of sanctity of life. The middleman is human rights, and we must achieve human rights before we can achieve that. So in this case, the view negative has automatically won the value and criterion debate. As government legitimacy and utilitarianism will actually support today's resolution, and it will hold up the entire negative case as well as the entire round. His contention 3, he said that a country bombed a health center. However, in the speech, he did not provide any exact evidence that that there was Americans involved in this attack. However, he stated our own people. However, there was not imperative evidence that there was actually our own people involved. And so I don't think that we can weigh this strong enough and hold up that claim, our own people. And so for the case of that point must automatically be dropped. So I'm going to move on to rebuttaling the attacks my opponent made against my case. So he said that my value of government legitimacy that we can't accomplish, or he basically brought up that we're providing this aid to these authoritarian regimes and that they're not legitimate. However, as I clearly showed in my case, we can accomplish this legitimate government form for these authoritarian regimes through democratization and through my value and my criterion. So once again, further strengthening my side on the value criterion debate. And as you can clearly see, today's round flows towards the negative on the value criterion debate. He also stated in his resolution analysis that we cannot just play one authoritarian regime. So by him only providing the Saudi Arabia evidence, we must hold him to his resolution analysis. And because that is because that's what he said, we can automatically drop that point he made against my value, because his RA stated that we can only weigh that one country, we have to weigh other authoritarian regimes. The negative can't just focus on one. We automatically have to hold him to that principle. Furthermore, he stated that that through my utilitarianism, you can achieve all these horrendous humanitarian crimes. But the people do not want these crimes. We are favoring the greatest number, and the greatest number are the people who are going to be going against these crimes. The people who are getting hurt, they're not going to want this, and so we cannot achieve this because they will be the greater number here at hand. So that attack automatically falls. His attack against my contention 1, he dropped my subpoint B. In addition, his attack on my contention 1, he tied it back into my value of government legitimacy. And as I've clearly shown, I've won the value criterion debate for today's round. So that attack's automatically dropped. On my contention two, you stated that in my contention two there was human rights abuses. However, I said that we only provide or that we prioritize countries that do not commit these human rights crimes. So his attack cannot fall because I did not state and go over the human rights that are being entitled here, and so automatically this will fall to the negative side. Now I will provide my voters. And then with that, I will conclude. So. My voter one for today's round is, as you can clearly see, the negative has more clearly and imperatively won the value and criterion debate. Before we can accomplish this value criterion, we must accomplish a middleman, in this case, it is human rights. And so by upholding his value criterion, we will not only be going against the entire resolution because it will not be strongly enough supported, but we will essentially be dropping the whole point at hand here. And then my value two is that in the cases of my contentions and my evidence, I have won the evidence debate today. I essentially have provided strong evidence backing for everything that in my case, and that the evidence tie is very strong. And with that, I can only see a negative ballot. Thank you.
I'd like to take the rest of my time. My judge ready? Yes. My audience ready? And is my opponent ready? So with that, shall begin. First of all, with moving on to further attack my opponent's value criterion, my opponent's value of governmental legitimacy, as we found out during cross-examination, we're not actually providing military to authoritarian to legitimate governments under my opponent's definition. So how can we, make them legitimate, as I stated again, if we're still providing them with the means? And as we've seen, we've provided aid and they're still not democratic. So my opponent is just hypothesizing what might happen in the future. As we know right now with the facts, those regimes are still still authoritarian. They're still illegitimate governments under my opponent's definition. My opponent stated that I was only using the example of Saudi Arabia in his defense on second contention with bad human rights track records. However, as stated in my first contention, subpoint A, the countries that are authoritarian regimes that the United States provides aid to that have been known to use child soldiers is Chad, Colombia, Cote d'Ivoire, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, India, Libya, Peru, Sri Lanka, Sudan, Israel, Indonesia, Nepal, Bhutan, Burundi, Yemen, Afghanistan, Lebanon, and Liberia. Those are all countries that my opponent failed to address. And as I stated in my analysis of the resolution, which my opponent did not attack, by the way, the burden is on the negative, with showing that we need to provide military aid universally. Because, as I stated earlier, the resolution does not provide any restrictions to certain authoritarian regimes. My opponent just focused on our argument with Saudi Arabia. However, he failed to state how it would affect other countries. He didn't universalize it, as I had stated in my resolution analysis. With defense on my value criterion debate, my opponent stated that the middleman is human rights, and that if human rights are accomplished, then we can meet my value criterion. However, my opponent did not attack the point that I made in my contention 3, subpoint B, basically stating that we need to spend more money on humanitarian aid, Red Cross organization, Doctors Without Borders organization. So basically I'm saying that human rights do need to be met, and we can meet them through non-violent means. Some voters I have is, I believe that I won the contentions debate, as that is a part of my judge's paradigm, and as I was able to defend my points and attack my points effectively. I believe that I had better flow. Furthermore, as I'm closing, might I just state that in the negative world, the death of 85,000 people of starvation is justified. Providing weapons to terrorists is justified, all because it's done in the name of safety. For these reasons, then I can see nothing but an affirmative ballot for today's resolution. Resolved, the United States ought not provide military aid to authoritarian regimes. Thank you.